more about Common House Richmond, how to become a member, and all of our plans for our grand opening and beyond by checking out our website or following us on Instagram. So with that, Logan and Ray, I will hand things over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Liza. So I am the Membership Engagement Manager in Charlottesville for Common House. I've been there for about 3 years. I grew up here, so I've been in Virginia most of my life besides college, where I was in Montreal, Canada. I've been out as a gay man since I was 14, so kind of always been interested in having these sorts of conversations and being involved in these communities and really kind of trying to be a part of the fight for racial and social equity. I also studied gender, sexuality, feminism, and social justice studies in undergrad, so that kind of informed that as well. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ray.
Unmute myself. Hi, Ray Berryman. I have been a part of the Richmond LGBTQ community probably since 2010 as far as doing work within the community. I got my start in media as well as in advocacy, working with Kevin Clay when he first started gayrva.com. And then when he transitioned the publication to RVA Mag, I started working with Clear Channel, which then transitioned to iHeartMedia and predominantly Q94 and their Pride radio station. And through that, still had a great relationship with Virginia Pride. So naturally, you know, this year, even though we weren't able to do a physical Pride event, you know, outdoor and have everybody together, when I talked to James and he told me what was going on, I had to be involved. I met Kevin with Gay RVA at Pride Fest. So my story in media, my story in advocacy, and my story really of being an out Black, you know, queer woman begins with Virginia Pride. So there was no way I was missing it. No matter where we took it, what we did with it, I had to be a part of it. So I'm very honored and excited to speak on this panel, as well as co-moderate with Logan. And again, as everybody has said, I just want to echo that this is the start of a conversation. This isn't the end of it. Everything at Stonewall was not done in one day. And everything around the intersection of being Black and part of the LGBTQ community is not done in one day either. So again, thank you all for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to a very engaging and enlightful discussion.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So the way this is going to work, we have 6 fabulous panelists, Ray being one of them, who will be discussing a couple questions that we've prepared. We'll read each one out loud so that you guys have that context as well. And then we'll move to a Q&A period after that. So Ray and I are going to introduce the panelists and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll move into discussion. Our first panelist is Charley Burton, who's a native of Charlottesville, Virginia. He transitioned later in life at the age of 50. He's always believed in service and currently serves on the board for Seville Pride, PFLAG, of the Blue Ridge, Common Ground Healing Arts, Diversity and Recovery, and he's one of the founding board members of Black Trans Men Incorporated. And I'll pass it over to you, Ray.
Awesome. Charley, you want to say hi to our audience or anything?
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? So Charley's kind of operating off of just having a root canal done about 2 hours ago. So if I nod off, just wake me up. I'll be all right.
We'll just yell at you.
Yeah.
We won't share any wine virtually with you, Charley. I don't think that'd be good right now. Not at all. Well, next, I am very proud to introduce this individual to the panel. It's someone that I have a relationship with and that I've worked with, Ted Lewis. Ted is the executive director of Side by Side, an organization dedicated to creating supportive communities where Virginia's LGBTQ plus youth can define themselves, belong, and flourish. Ted, who uses they, them pronouns, has over a decade of experience working with the LGBTQ plus youth, including at UNC Charlotte and the University of Richmond. Ted was recognized for efforts in the 2018 as one of the Style Weekly's 40 Under 40, and in 2019 by Virginia Pride with the Firework Award. So we are very excited to have Ted on this panel. Ted does great work in the community. Again, as I said, I have much experience working with Ted, so we are very excited to get your perspective on this intersection. So welcome, Ted, and say hi to the audience if you like.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Ray, for that wonderful, warm introduction. I'm a big fan of yours as well as everybody on this panel, and I'm grateful to be a part of the discussion tonight.
Awesome, thanks, Ted. Logan, you want to kick it off to our next on the panel? It's me. If you want to read my if you want to read my bio. Logan, you're on mute. You're on mute.
For sure. Sorry. So Ray, my co-moderator, is a senior integrated marketing specialist with Radio 1, the leading voice speaking to Black America. She's an experienced sales and marketing professional with a demonstrated history of working in the broadcast media industry for over 10 years. Prior to starting at Radio 1, she was a regional point manager for multicultural marketing with iHeartMedia, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. In this role, she coordinated regional market-based sales efforts targeted at reaching Hispanics, African Americans, and the LGBTQ community. And she was also director of sales and marketing for Gay RVA, Richmond, Virginia's go-to source for news, entertainment, and information about the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. Always been a strong advocate for the LGBTQ community, and she's also involved with the local Minority Business Alliance and nonprofits. And she is also co-chair for the YP board for Junior Achievement.
AKA I'm booked and busy.
And then I know James already introduced himself, but I'll give you a little formal introduction as well. So James is the executive director of Virginia Pride, uses he, him pronouns, and from 2015 to 2020, James served as a president before recently being hired as the executive director. This organization is dedicated to making the Richmond region a better place for LGBTQ people to live, work, and visit. And James has been working in the nonprofit management, public relations, and LGBTQ advocacy space for more than 15 years, having held senior level positions in global PR agencies and community-based organizations in New York and Washington, D.C. Want to say hello, James? Beautiful.
Awesome. Well, I'll move on next to someone that I love and have experience working with, especially this year around this topic that we're talking about with the intersection of the Pride movement and the Black Lives Movement. Natasha Crosby. Natasha is a champion of marginalized communities through their work for affordable and sustainable housing as a realtor and investor. Natasha's success is attributed to their passion for service, whether their client is buying, selling, or investing in real estate. Also as president for the Richmond LGBTQ Chamber, treasurer of UGRC, aka Black Pride RVA, and a member of the board for Side by Side. They are on a relentless quest for inclusion, equality, and justice for Black, people of color, and queer people. And businesses throughout Central Virginia. As a member of the Virginia Campaign for a Family-Friendly Economies Paid Family and Medical Leave Advisory Board, Natasha has given testimony at both the state and federal level in support of paid leave for all. A social insurance programming providing 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave. Natasha has been featured in many media outlets, including CNN Business, CBS Money Watch, The Huffington Post. Natasha believes in a sustainable economy, and it can only be achieved when all members of society are able to be equitably and to be able to participate at an equitable level. So welcome, Natasha, and thank you for joining us, and feel free to say hi to the people.
Well, thank you, Ray, for that, and thank you for Common House for putting this on, and James, of course, for helping with this chat tonight. I'm happy to be here, and am looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Natasha. So our last panelist is Lindsay Church, who is a Navy veteran who served from 2008 to 2012 as a cryptologic technician interpretive linguist. During her time in service, she attended language school at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, where she learned Persian Farsi. And after spending 2 years at a cyber intelligence command, she left the Navy and returned home to Seattle. When she made that move, she attended the University of Washington, where she earned her BA in Near Eastern Language and Civilization and Islamic Studies, and went on to earn her master's in International Studies in the Middle East. So after grad school, Lindsay began working with veterans and helping them successfully transition to higher education and on to meaningful employment. But through this work, she began to notice that there were many people being left out of the narrative of the US military veteran. And in 2017, she resigned her position as the commander of the American Legion Post, or of an American Legion Post, excuse me, to start Minority Veterans of America, along with Catherine Pratt, which is an organization that works to ensure that there's a community of support around the underrepresented veterans so that we may see the true diversity of the US military reflected in our veteran communities. So Lindsay, if you want to say hello to everybody.
Hi, everyone. If I had known you were going to read the whole thing, I would have cut that way shorter. But thanks for having me. And apologies for any background. I'm at a park in San Antonio. So if you hear kids, it's because of that. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And for those who are watching our live stream from a different platform, hello. I know you guys joined a couple of minutes after we started the call, but thanks for being here. So we will go ahead and get ready to jump into our question period, where our panelists will answer some questions. And then, like I said, if you all have questions for them or want to address any of the questions that are brought up, we'll have a question and answer period after that. If you have a question and are afraid you're going to forget it, feel free to post it in the chat, and I'll make sure that it gets brought up during the question and answer period. So our first question is, so each question I kind of gave a little bit of background context to, so I'll read that and then ask the question. So many LGBTQ civil rights efforts in the 20th century were very white and cisgender, at least in terms of their public faces and who reaped the lion's share of the benefits that came with the progress they facilitated. Why do we think that these gay, lesbian, and predominantly white cisgender individuals felt that their rights in the fight to acquire them was separate and unrelated to the fight for racial equality, or for the rights of trans or gender nonconforming or non-binary individuals? And anyone on the panel?
I guess I'll kick it off. I'll kick it off. My take on it is, it comes from a place of kind of the path of less resistance. I feel that cis white men felt it was easier to get, you know, the point across or get what was needed or get those rights without bringing in anybody in the community that would be problematic to the situation. So, you know, it felt more palatable as a cis white man to say, well, here's who I am and here's who I love, and I just want rights to love them, and that's that. Versus when you bring in someone that's trans, there's a whole nother set of situations that go along with that maybe someone, you know, that is opposing this situation is not going to understand. When you bring in someone that's Black, it's a whole nother set of, you know, systemic racism that comes with that someone's not going to be accepting of. So I feel like it was a situation that was left out. It was like, let's just get across here. Like, we're going to grab you and we're going to pull you across and we're going to help you, but like, let's just get here first. And that's where I feel like it came from.
So I'll jump in. I want to push back just a little bit on the framing that you offered, Logan, just because I think that you're absolutely right. There is sort of this collective memory of the majority of leaders being white, gay, cisgender, and even men, right? But I also think we forget that there's a rich history of LGBTQ people of color being very active in movement work for gay and lesbian rights, for trans rights, for civil rights, right? The one of the key organizers of the most famous civil rights march in the US, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, was Bayard Rustin, an openly gay man who was also Black, right? Now, he also did work in gay rights movements, because you can't disconnect him being gay and Black. That happens to him all the time. He wasn't Black on Monday and gay on Tuesday and something else on Wednesday, right? We forget Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera as leaders in Stonewall, right? And the Stonewall movement being a pushback against police brutality and violence, not against the fight for marriage equality or the fight for employment non-discrimination. It was literally, we just want the police to stop harassing us, right? We forget James Baldwin and Audre Lorde and other leaders in the civil rights movement who were very adamant in their support of LGBTQ folks, as well as civil rights for African Americans. And I think that what we're seeing now even is the idea of trying to create single issues when, as Audre Lorde said, we don't live single issue lives, right? So there has always been LGBTQ folks of color on the front line in the movement work. Now, to make it easier to remember though, it's easier to say Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, civil rights movement, done. Right? It's easier to say, Barney Frank, white, gay, congressman, that's the leader, instead of looking at the more complexities of this, right? So the last piece I'll just throw out there is in our current movement work, we're seeing on a national and even international level, you have the Black Lives Matter movement explicitly talking about LGBTQ rights on their website, in their policy platforms. It's founded by 3 women, 2 of which are openly queer. This is not just a movement for Black people. Black cisgender heterosexual people. It's a movement for everyone that centers and prioritizes Black people for sure, in the same way the gay rights movement prioritized gay and lesbian folks. But I think that there's this idea of sort of forgetting that rich history that's there. And we see it in even other groups. Another organization nationally and again, somewhat internationally is Mi Gente, which is working on immigration rights. Their platform is explicitly LGBTQ inclusive as well. So I just think that with that rich history, we forget, right? Now, what happens then is those folks who are in the streets, who are fighting on the ground, who are often folks of color, who are often also engaged in survival sex work, who are also engaged in, the sort of the outside of the most economic system, right? They're day laborers, they're folks that are not being paid with a W-2, right? They do the hard work in the streets, and then folks feel more comfortable coming out in the workplace. And that's where I think Ray's point of white, cisgender men who are conforming in their appearance, right? They present in a masculine way, get sort of the benefits from that, because it's easier for those in power. And overall, if we look at elected officials, we're talking mostly white, cisgender, and men, to give power to people who look like them and say, yeah, it's cool if you get married, but let's not talk about disabled people being able to get married, right? So I just wanted to push back a little bit on that, but I fully agree with what Ray said as well. And I welcome the other panelists too. Apologies, I tend to ramble.
Yeah, Ted, I totally agree with you, and I think your points are so important about the folks, and especially the people of color that have been fighting for LGBTQ rights for a very, very long time. And truly, even before the term intersectionality was something that was part of our lexicon, those folks were truly intersectional, and they were doing this intersectional work very, absolutely. I think kind of, if I might take a little bit of liberty with assuming that I know where Logan was coming with a question, and certainly in my experience doing this kind of work in sort of the early to mid to even late 90s, especially in big cities like New York and DC, when you had HRC and GLAAD and all these other big LGBTQ organizations, all of which were led by white people, rich white people most often. Their boards were majority white, certainly. The events that you would go to, almost entirely white. And so I think that it's understandable that there might be the perception that was what was driving this movement. One of the things that, really disturbed me a lot in the mid 90s was even just around, and I know we're talking sort of more about around race, but sort of the mindset, I think, that sort of frames some of the mindset of some of the larger LGBTQ advocacy organizations. When hate crimes legislation was being proposed and considered in Congress in the mid 90s, there was an active debate in the community about whether we should even include transgender folks in that discussion. Transgender folks, and the decision was made by somebody that not to. And in fact, the first bill that was introduced by Ted Kennedy specifically excluded transgender people from hate crimes legislation. And so I think that there was definitely some degree of maleness, of white gayness that was sort of drawing that was sort of driving some of the advocacy work that was happening there. So I think it is. I think it from my perspective and my perception of the time then was that we had a lot of work to do around race and certainly gender identity in those times.
For myself, I agree with everything that everyone was saying. For myself, growing up, and in my bio says that I transitioned later, and trying to find people to identify with, I could not find that. Of course, we did back in my day. It tells you how old I am. We didn't have internet accessibility, but when I did start discovering who I thought I was going to be, but still pushed it back, what I came across in the difficulties in trying to get into different LGBTQ communities was basically, let's just put it on the table, was white privilege. If you didn't have the commas in the bank account and you didn't have the degrees on the wall, you were not allowed in the spaces in the LGBTQ community. And I can only speak for you here in Charlottesville. And so those people like the Marsha P. Johnsons, and who I had the privilege just a few weeks ago of sitting on a panel with Miss Major, those were names that I learned later in life. And then when I learned and educated myself about them, they are the people who made where we are today. But because they were the sex workers and because, they were out in the street and they didn't have, as Ted said, the appropriate W-2, they were not allowed to be in the spaces with the other white community. And so I look at and I see, as we're moving forward with this Black Lives Matter, it wasn't until June 3rd when our former president, Barack Obama, mentioned Tony McDade's name that we really started recognizing that what the plight and what Black trans people of color are going through. What is this, September, I'm in October, and we've got 29 Black deaths of trans people so far, and we've surpassed that from where we were last year. And so Tony McDade is the transgender community's George Floyd, is the way I look at it. And so we cannot ignore what Tony went through. And in some way, I guess we have to be grateful that we're marching in the direction that we're going in now, because we are having these panels and we are recognizing that something is not right. And so I appreciate that we're able to have this voice and be able to say that. And I appreciate the allies who are now stepping up saying, we now see what you're going through and we want to help you. And so if we continue to have these forums and do things and not be uncomfortable at sitting at other people's table and being able to be comfortable eating different types of food per se, we might be able to get somewhere where one day we won't have to have these forums and we'll all be together.
Natasha, do you want to jump in? Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, yeah.
I'll go after.
All right, good deal. So the question is why white cis people felt that they were first in line for equality, right? And I think we have to bring it back to the class structure that exists in all of America, right? Like we can all identify as LGBTQ, but we cannot separate ourselves from the greater society that we live in. And so even within that segment, there are class issues there, right? And so if you are a white cis person, you are already ingrained to believe that you should be first in line, right? And so if you're up against opposition that wants to take away your rights, it doesn't believe that your rights are as valid as theirs, you essentially become kind of the poster child for those rights, right? And so it is easier, to Ted's point, to leave people behind. Currently in the LGBTQ community and in recent history, there are a lot of Black LGBTQ folks who are more comfortable just saying that they're Black and queer, right? Because LGBTQ doesn't necessarily represent them and hasn't really done so. That can, in some communities, that can really just transfer to cis white person, right? Who happens to be LGBTQ. So I think we have to be mindful of that class structure and how that separates us within this community. Because just like Charley said, trans folks have been front of line throughout history, right? Black queer folks, front of the line throughout history in the fight, right? But when it comes time to go to your legislator, or it comes time to recognize and put people first in trying to achieve these rights, it 9 times out of 10, it is that cis white person who is going to take it across the finish line, right? So I think it's being mindful of that class structure even within the LGBTQ community.
So from me, what I see is like the tale of two movements. Essentially, you have the queer equality movement, which is all about conforming to this heteronormative American dream rather than understanding that systems of oppression make that American dream just out of reach. Where the queer liberation movement is more about fighting the system that actually oppresses us rather than conforming to the system that we all know is debunked. We recognize that there's multiple layers to our identities that are highly informative to our lived experiences, where the fight for equality is about having what everybody else has, even if what everybody else has isn't enough. So I see it as two different movements. And essentially, I mean, to the points earlier, Ray, you were saying the path of least resistance, that's the queer equality movement. It's very much trying to conform to the system, adapt yourself so that you can achieve the American dream. Well, the American dream is out of reach for most people when you recognize that the systems of oppression are designed to keep us down. Where the queer liberation movement realizes that our identities, no matter what they are marginalized and entwined in each other's ability to break free from those systems that oppress us all. So I see this in like the fight when we talk a lot about marriage equality, but I'm from the military, so of course I got to talk about military things. So I think about this in the context of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Well, I was serving at the time under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and we celebrated the end of it, and we recognized, like it was such a major accomplishment. It was like this liberating moment, and we turned our backs on the trans community, and the trans community didn't even get the right to serve until 2016, and then it's been abruptly taken away. And because of the politics of the current administration and everything that we're serving under, we've forgotten about it. Like there's still a trans ban in place, and oftentimes the victory is here. We've won marriage equality, we've won the right to serve. Well, we can't continue to conform to the system that continues to oppress us if we're going to be fighting for queer liberation rather than queer equality.
I think you all really summed it up. And I think bringing home this final point and kind of putting arms around it is, and a lot of times we say this, especially as Black queer people and everything that's going on right now, none of us are free until we're all free. So period, regardless of however you define yourself, if even within a organization, whether it's how I feel marginalized within the Black community or how I feel marginalized in the LGBTQ community, until I have freedom altogether, regardless of, your race, your identity, disability, whatever it is, until we all have an equal platform, until we all can come and get the same opportunities, we're not free. So that's what it all comes back to. What you said about the military, yes, don't ask, don't tell, but that's gone. But still, now what are we doing with trans life? What are we doing with trans people just in general within the community? And still, what's going on now with the Black Lives Matter movement, and within that, so many trans people were, being brutally murdered, and they weren't getting that national coverage. But then we look within the Black Lives Matter and we say, well, so many Black girls go missing and they don't get the national coverage as white girls. There's so much layers, there's so much classism, and we just need to destroy it all. We all, again, it's like you said, the difference of I want to conform versus I want to tear the whole structure down. It was never right to begin with. And I think bringing attention like this are the first steps to that. So piggybacking off of everything that we've said, I want to move on to the next question, and I want to talk about both conscious and internalized racism, transphobia, and homophobia. All have functioned within the progress that the Pride movement has made. Its evolution in context of mainstream acceptance and the relatively recent involvement of corporate America and Pride celebrations. So the question is, how does the even more recent corporate embrace, and I have my own opinions on this one, but I'm gonna let y'all go and I'm gonna just set it on fire at the end. But how does the even more recent corporate embrace of Black Lives Matter and racial justice more generally play into this? So again, we experienced it when Pride got popular and everybody had a rainbow water bottle, and now everybody did their blackout day and it's Black Lives Matter. And I'm not, we're changing the name of the syrup and all of that. How does it all play into this? How do you feel about the corporate embrace that occurred? It really started during June. It started during Pride Month. So thoughts. Again, I have so many, but I'm gonna let y'all go.
All right, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, and it's actually interesting because I think probably maybe sometime around June, sort of, as I think we started to really, about the time we started to recognize that this, what was happening in this country, especially around the questions around race and how this country deals with it, started to come to the surface. Someone asked me, what do you think is going to drive change the fastest? And I kind of cynically said, I think corporate America is going to push it forward really quickly. And I say that not because I think that corporate America is the quote unquote the savior in this in any way, but they have tremendous amounts of money. Immediately commercials started going on television, supporting Black Lives Matter, dealing with difficult issues and putting that in front of the average American on, during primetime television. And it actually surprised me a little bit, that it happened that quickly, but even B, that corporate America was willing to go there so quickly. And I think, while I don't think that corporate America, I think I have a love-hate relationship with corporate America. I think that there's a lot of good that can be done, especially just because of the tremendous amounts of money that they have to put into movements, into embracing change, pushing for change. But I struggle with whether or not it is something that is genuine, whether it is a marketing ploy, whether it is something that, whether they are co-opting a movement for their own benefit, which I think is disgusting. But I think that there is a role for corporate America in this. But I think that I think that we need to have some serious discussions about what that role is and how we, as a community, harness what corporate America has to offer.
I can jump in next if no one else is up. So I appreciate what corporate America has done thus far, right? Like it's great to see the commercials, to see the backing of Black people, right? Is pretty amazing. Um, if we look at history, however, this isn't the first time we've been here, right? Can you imagine after the civil rights movement, right? Like after, Black people were on TV and they weren't the maid, how corporations, those commercials looked and how that made Black people feel initially, right? Like we're finally getting a bit of acceptance. We're finally being able to integrate, to become a part of this society. And then we saw the next iteration of oppression, right? That's when the redlining came out. That's when Black business districts were defunded. That's when social programs started to implement ways to break up the Black family, right? And so in those iterations of oppression, we saw corporate America fall to the wayside, right? And so here we are again now in the current moment. And yeah, okay, it's great. We've got Black Lives Matter. We have corporate America, issuing the commercials, and they're having a whole lot of in-house TED Talks, excuse me, Ted, but a lot of in-house TED Talks about equality and diversity and inclusion, and that's wonderful. I'm interested to see how corporate America stands the test of time this time in supporting Black people.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that Amazon gave me free Black Lives Matter movies for a month, and and all that. But I'm like Natasha. I want to see what you do by this time next year. And while you're doing Black Lives Matter, of course, I'm going to say, where's your Black trans lives? Recognize us all. And I am all for the Black Lives Matter movement, but we can't have Black Lives Matter unless you have Black gay lives matter, Black trans lives matter, Black single mothers lives matters. We need to go it all the way across the board. And so while you can pull a little Miss Butterworth off the shelf, it's still the same damn syrup. I mean, it's nothing. It still tastes the same. So you can take her shape off the shelf, but it's still the same. And so it's the same with corporate America. You can make every banner in the book and have Black Lives Matter, but are you recognizing all of our lives? Are you recognizing that there are right now, I can speak for I sit on a lot of boards, but I can speak for Black trans men incorporated in BTAC, and when we were sending out these COVID relief packets to people, and how many people had no fixed address for us to be able to send these COVID relief kits to, because they're homeless. And there's shelters that are not taking Black trans women because you don't have any shelters to put trans women in, or you don't have shelters to put the Black trans men in. And so where is corporate America when we're going through this? So if you're going to give me free movies on Amazon, then maybe you can just take that money and I'll continue to pay for the Amazon movies, and you give it back to where it really needs to help.
For me, I come from like a movement building space. So I'm thinking about this from the movement building perspective and how Pride became influx of capital from corporations. And so I think the recent influx of like corporate investment in Pride and Black Lives Matter is kind of complicated, because corporations and the media have actually crafted the narrative that really got us here. So like, much to James's point, like we don't see them as a savior. You can't save us from something you built. So that's like point number one. But also from the movement building perspective, like movements and organizations need resources to fuel what they do. So like, but there also has to be a recognition that like that true liberation will only come when wealth is redistributed. So like corporate money for our movements is like fine, whatever. And it has to be able to fuel the actual fight for liberation. So corporate resources, while they help fuel us, they also, when they fuel us, they demand a seat at the table. So the biggest imperative and the biggest onus on anybody leading an organization or movement taking money from corporations is a recognition that this is social responsibility money. This is not to absolve people of sins, and it can't be built for a party. It needs to be built. If you're going to take corporate funds, it has to be invested in equity. That money has to be redistributed and put back in the community. You know, much to Charley's point, it needs to go back to where it started and where it needs to go to begin with. We continue to allow corporations to absolve themselves of the sins in the past through giving us money, but it's not going to pay the way to uncapitalize our society. Like, we still have to recognize that our oppression is wrapped up in whether or not this corporation succeeds, which is also wrapped up in their corporate social responsibility. So this whole thing, while we do it because it's an imperative to be able to survive as minoritized groups, we also have to recognize that when we take this money, we have to do something to increase the equity and the standing for our community at the same time.
The panelists all said it great. The only thing I wanted to add is that, you know, I have seen a corporate shift in this year in terms of embracing Black Lives Matter and being able to talk about it, but only to a certain extent. So yes, the NFL is going to let their players protest, but Colin Kaepernick is not coming back to anybody's team, right? Yes, we can talk about Black Lives Matter, that's great, but we're actually not going to talk about police brutality, which is the root of what's happening. You know, Ray even talked about changing the person on the syrup, right? But not addressing the actual systemic oppression and the laws that the leaders of Black Lives Matter and all over the country have said, this is what we're looking for, right? So, you know, I haven't seen a corporation send a letter to Kentucky saying that until the officers that killed Breonna Taylor are arrested and held accountable, we won't do business in Kentucky. But I did see corporations step up and say, when North Carolina passed HB2, which is the anti-trans work, that they said we won't hold our conferences in North Carolina until there is justice for trans people. So, you know, and this is sort of dovetailing into where I think we're going next, but that idea of what can we learn? Well, we need to hold, if we're gonna take that money and corporations are asking of us to do certain things, we also can push back and ask those same corporations to do something too. Because when a corporation invests their social responsibility dollars in a pride celebration, in a nonprofit like a Side by Side, they're putting that on their company report. They're putting that out there to get tax benefits, right? So it is not a simple, you know, thank you for the money, we'll be quiet and do what you say. It is a mutual beneficial relationship. And I think we can do better. And I count myself in this as you know, a leader of an organization in trying to push those companies to do a little bit more when it comes to the power that they hold. I want to work with the system I have while trying to transform the system at the same time, right? I still got to eat. I still got to pay my light bill. As you can see, it's getting darker and darker in my house already, right? Like I got to do these things. And that takes money. And ultimately, in the current capitalist system, there's only a couple people that hold the reins that trickles down to a lot of other funds, right? You know, Disney owns a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of stuff. And that money goes really far. And so if some of those corporate leaders are willing to step up, as Charley said, and actually kind of put not just their money, but their power where they could, I think we could see some real change. And I'm hopeful that we can hold those companies accountable. I'm grateful for the movies, Amazon, thank you. But can you also talk about where you're gonna build your next headquarters? Because you said you're gonna build it in Virginia, right? Well, what are the laws in Virginia as it relates to Black folks, and what about police accountability? The General Assembly in Virginia just declined to pass and end qualified immunity for law enforcement. Well, what happened? We did a whole special session to address Black Lives Matter and failed to pass the one key element that was a part of the platform. So, you know, I just think we can also hold our corporations more accountable, and they have shown that they are willing at times to use their power to push for social justice when they want to.
So I will go ahead and finish unpacking it. I've existed in corporate America within both of these movements. The popularity as far as going corporate, I worked for iHeartMedia when the popularity around Pride got big, and that's when we started our Pride radio station. And that's where me as a member of the community felt good. And I was like, I want to go out and I want to partner with everybody that I've already been working with to say, look what I can offer you and look how I can help you. And I did that. And then now within Black Lives Matter, I'm honored and blessed to be working at Radio 1 Urban One, where again, I could go and say, look where I'm at, look how I can help you. And also too, now I'm finally at a place where I can bring my whole self to work and I can say, well, look what I can do and be Black, but also look, like they let me be gay too. And this is a serious conversation because I've dealt with over the past 10 years having to dilute myself, dilute my Blackness, dilute my queerness, dilute that little extra oomph that was Ray to make myself more palatable to others in this space within corporate America. To not say my partner, to when somebody asks, do I have a boyfriend, say no, but I don't say I got a girlfriend. So this is something that exists outside of just let me put a logo on it, let me put a Black, post on my Instagram. This is something that, people who exist in corporate America deal with every day. There's the outside structure and there's the money, but there's internally, do you have employee resource groups? How do I exist as a Black woman in your workplace? What are the microaggressions that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Am I being called loud? Am I being called bossy? There's so much outside of this structure that we see the big part of it. We see the police brutality and everything with it, but there's so much that Black women, that Black people, that queer people, that marginalized people exist within corporate America, that I don't care how much money you give. It's as a Black woman, I don't feel comfortable on a Zoom call. It doesn't matter. It's as if I look at your board and there's no diversity, it doesn't matter. That if you, so what, you gave $100,000 for bonds for people, for protesters back in June. What have you done since then? I don't even care if you're creating programming for Black people. Who's the producer? Who's on the back end of it? I don't want you to just pay a Black face to come and literally, and I'm gonna say this, and everybody Black knows what I mean, shuck and jive for you on the camera. When what are you really doing to make equity investments within the Black community? So it's so much deeper than that. My thing is now working within this space and having this opportunity, and I've done virtual events and virtual panels, is if Black Lives Matter, prove it, but also all Black lives matter. Black trans lives matter. Black women matter. Black queer people matter. So until you're really ready to step forward and prove that and put not only your money, but put everything else within your corporate company internally and externally into it, then take that post down. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. I don't believe in it. And I don't even want your money. Like, keep it at that point. If you make it difficult for me as I'm doing programming with what I'm doing to get the money, it says, well, do you really want to give it to me? Or if you have to struggle to find someone to speak on my panel. Well, if you don't have a person readily able to lend and be a subject matter on, matter expert on this, then is this really the realm that you're existing in? So I've been on both sides of it, and I've seen it, and I've seen the outward appearance be good, and then internally their HRC score is trash. But they got a water bottle. And it's the same thing now. They gave all this money for the bond fund, and they got a post, and they got a t-shirt. But internally, there's a Black girl that can't be herself in her workplace, and that's marginalized, and that has to focus with microaggressions, and have someone, thank God they can't touch her hair through Zoom, but just still all of that stuff existing. So until that's fixed, it doesn't matter. Again, until we all are free, none of us are free. So that's my soapbox on that. Logan, the next question is you.
Thank you, Ray. That was really awesome. I appreciated all the contributions, and this conversation is just so fruitful. And I know that we said it would end at 7:30, but we're just going to keep going through because there have been so many awesome contributions. So it's pushed our timeline back a little bit. If you do need to hop off the call, feel free, but we will address 2 more questions. Hopefully a little swiftly, and then we'll move into the question and answer period. So the next thing we want to address is, and I think based on the conversation that's already happened, we can also question if this is even possible, or if this is really beneficial, if these things are kind of coming out of the society and systems that we currently live in now. But what we want to kind of interrogate is, how do those who have historically benefited from the privilege and resources that the LGBTQ civil rights movement and the civil rights movements have accrued over time, both through societal evolution and the evolution of the Pride movement, how did these people, so predominantly white, cisgender, LGBTQ identifying individuals, leverage these things to contribute to the fight against the myriad inequalities that Black, Indigenous, and people of color, especially queer and LGBTQ identifying members of those communities face? Keeping in mind that oppression is intersectional, it can be experienced socially, economically, in the health sphere, environmentally, in terms of being ostracized from religious communities. So just kind of thinking about that in a more intersectional way as well.
I'll kick it off and kind of lead us in the direction. So this question, Logan, when you sent it and when I first got the Google Doc for it, it made me think about something that I've been working on, and that a series I've got going saying, have Black lives ever mattered? We all know the answer. No, it is what it is. I think you have to go back to the root of it. Have queer lives ever mattered? Have anybody that's been marginalized, have your lives truly mattered? Or have people capitalized off of the oddity that you are? People with disabilities were placed in circuses. Black people were placed in circuses on display. Members of the LGBTQ community were used for sex work. So I feel that, you know, in order to move forward and for those with privilege to be able to essentially atone, you know, for the sins of the father, you have to really go back and look at the plight of all systemic oppression, whether it's on a racial issue, whether it's from LGBTQ, whether it's people from disabilities. You really have to look back and see how it all started, from legislation, from socioeconomic levels, from psyche. There's a lot of things that are psychologically built into us. The fear of Black men is something that is psychologically put there from, you know, from long before within the Black community, and how Black men feel about the LGBTQ community is something that goes back to slavery and what was done to them while under that oppression. So I feel like we have to go back and really atone from those original, in a sense, from those original sins, acknowledge them, and start unpacking that. It's not something that's going to be quick. A lot of this stuff is information that people really don't know about. Things that have happened in the American history that people don't understand, but it has to be brought to a larger scale. Those are the conversations that we need to have to really understand, you know, you can't get anywhere and you can't move forward if you don't realize where you came from. And I think we're at a pivotal moment. Everybody's locked in the house. You really don't got nothing else to do, or at least you shouldn't be doing anything. And it's time where people can really research and have the conversations that we're having now, to move forward, and to get to a better place. I hope 2021 is a better year in so many ways. But I really hope around these issues around systemic oppression, something has happened, something besides the surface level BS that's happened over the past few months. And I think conversations like this, in this sphere, but also within big companies and on large platforms, are the start of it. So.
So I'll go next. So I, again, come back from the movement perspective, and much to your point about, like, you were kind of alluding to atoning for sins and addressing systemic inequities. And I think for movement leaders, I think adjusting that framework from going back to that, from the equality narrative and from the equality lens and into an equity and just like building an equitable and a just society. So you're not trying to conform to the equality and that like heteronormative American dream. We are actually looking for a more equitable and more just society. And part of that is approaching this with an intersectional movement building lens so that we can recognize that the fight for these issues is outside of our siloed understanding of the LGBTQ rights movement. So we have to be looking at what are the systemic inequities and the oppressive like systems that continue to keep us down as a whole. And, you know, right to your point, like collective liberation here is like, and I'm often reminded of Nikita Oliver speaking to a crowd saying that you can't have equality until you have equity. And so you can't have an equal society until we built those equity measures in. And so as a white leader in this space, like I know for myself, the way that I approach this, the work is to get the hell out of the way. Part of that is blazing paths for others to step in front of you. It's not my time. There's more panels than I think anybody in the world ever needs to sit on. And there's always going to be opportunity. And so looking at this, not from a scarcity mentality, but from a message of abundance, like we need to be lifting and elevating as well as doing the background work to make sure that we're actually building new and qualified leaders and empowering them for success. And so I think we need to continue, especially coming from a dominant culture identity, is to continue to empower and grow that next generation and get the hell out of the way.
Lindsay, it's always so hard to follow up behind you because you always hit it on the head. So I'm gonna give it my best go, but what Ray and Lindsay said for sure. So I think, you know, one way that we hold people accountable is through the organizations that we have, right? Like when we have this legislation, like the Values Act, for one, right? We have these legislations passed. It's really these organizations that have formed and have been able to kind of push that legislation forward, right? And so I think holding these organizations accountable to have that same fight for Black people, for Black queer people, Black trans people, the same way that you fought so hard essentially for yourselves, right? Because, and I, you know, some people might not like it, but where are the LGBT Dems? Who are these people? Who are they? And what do they do? You know how I found out about them? When our governor donned blackface and they said, oh no, it's okay. We're not gonna say anything about it. We're just gonna keep moving past it because we have to pass the Values Act, right? This is an example of an LGBTQ org not listening to Black people. And where have they been in this movement, right? Black Lives Matter, we're here, we're trying to get things passed. We, like Ted said, one of the most crucial pieces of reforming the police, taking away that qualified immunity, got dismissed, right? That's not gonna happen this time. Where were they? Because I know other organizations that I'm proud to be a part of and have, you know, written letters with and had LGBT organizations, you know, the list is this long on trying to push forward these agendas for Black and brown queer folks. And I do see a name that's not on that list. So who are you really here for? And I think it's going to take us collectively holding these organizations accountable when they don't show up to the table. The same way we want to hold corporations accountable, right? Simply because they have the money to do so. But an organization like that has the political power to at least push the dial, and they chose not to. So we need to hold people accountable and make sure that we, in the same fight that we did to try to get the Values Act passed, right? Like that was a long, hard fight. This is also a long, hard fight, and we need allies in this fight who claim to be a part of who we are.
Natasha, I totally agree with you there. And I think that's kind of, to be honest with you, when we first started talking about this roundtable and this discussion, I think you've literally hit sort of the nail on the head in terms of what it was we wanted to achieve by this. And it was a call to action to those of us who have amassed connections and power and you know, political power and media power and all of that, like how do we bring, because we've spent a ton of time and a ton of money fighting for LGBTQ rights. And with that comes a Rolodex of people, that's an old term, but a Rolodex of connections, people that will take our phone calls, politicians that will have conversations with us because they've gotten to know us through this work. So how do we bring that to bear? And how do we have that conversation which says, thank you for doing what you've done on our issues, but I now need to hold you accountable and I need you to do this on behalf of this community or these folks or this issue. We're seeing some of that even with our coalition of LGBTQ leaders in Richmond. We're starting to move into that space a little bit better. And we're starting to think about how do we use the connections that we have with City Hall, or how do we use the connections that we have with this, with the State Assembly or whatever it is, and collectively using that to address issues that I think even 6 months ago, we wouldn't have necessarily gone there. And I'm glad to see that. We need to do more of that. I think that we're making some progress on those fronts, but we need to do more of it. That's really what I would love to see out of this, is for those of us that have spent a lot of time and a lot of energy building those connections, to use them and to hold those folks accountable on issues related to racial justice as we have for LGBTQ equality.
So I have to ask myself the question every day, what can I do to make things better? And so I'll tell a little quick story. I got approached to sit on this board for yoga. Okay, guys, look at me. I don't do yoga, okay? But I can be the Black trans voice that can introduce a different type of healing for my brothers and sisters by being on that board and learning about that board and bringing that to them and saying, hey, you know what? I did try this fucking shit and it worked. All right. So come on and go with me. And I'll tell the last story is I sit on the board of Seville Pride as their Black trans person. And I went to these people who is, I'm the only Black, they're predominantly white. And I said, our organization needs binders to give out to young Black trans kids who don't have money to buy a binder. The woman that ordered these binders is an older white cisgender woman who I didn't have to tell her twice how to order this binder. And I tell that story because she was willing to learn. And so where do we go from here with this? We continue to have these types of forums, but we need to bring organizations in on these forums to listen and hope that they're willing to learn how different we are, and that even though we are different, we're all trying to do the same thing. You know, I'm in recovery, and in AA, they tell us that we are a group who normally would not mix. And so that's what we need to do with these corporations and these organizations and these town halls is this is a great panel, but bring some of your big corporation people in and tell them that we want you to sit in on this panel. And we want you to hear this next time, because we can tell this to our people, the LGBTQ community, to the Black community, but is the corporations listening? They're the ones with the dollars. They're the ones that are going to make the difference for us.
The one tiny piece I'll add to the brilliance of my fellow panelists here is that a lot of the issues that face LGBTQ people, regardless of race, impact Black people at disproportionate rates. School to prison pipeline, incarceration, sex work, drugs, etc. So if our goal is to fight for LGBTQ equality, we should be the first ones signing up for the BLM work, because Black Lives Matter has already put all of those as a priority. We know that particularly Black trans folks are significantly more likely to have negative interactions with law enforcement. So now we know this, we know better, hopefully we start doing better. So what does, I'm excited to see what does next year's, everybody take a little prayer moment, next year's in-person Pride festivities look like? Are police going to be there? Are police going to be recruiting at those events? Are police going to do security? Or are we going to reimagine something different, right? Are we going to continue to push, as Ray said, this is the moment where it's okay to say Black Lives Matter when it wasn't maybe a year ago or 2 years ago because corporations have got on board, right? And I love what Natasha said about holding us accountable. At Side by Side, we made some intentional decisions to prioritize Black LGBTQ youth. And we did that in 2019. Not because we're super progressive and amazing and we did it before you, because we're playing catch up on what should have been done in 1991 when the organization was founded in a predominantly Black city, period. So that atonement is there and that need to continue to work and move forward. But I know if I can prioritize Black trans kids who are experiencing homelessness in the city of Richmond, then white suburban kids in Henrico County are gonna be just fine. Because if that Black trans 17-year-old living on the street doing survival sex work has the resources they need to survive, and not only that, but thrive, then all the LGBTQ kids are gonna make it, right? So I think that there's the ability now for us to reimagine things. And because of the pandemic, life has been put on pause, as Ray said. So let's get to thinking, what is the next iteration of this? What is possible? What can this look like moving forward, right? Chest binders should be available, buy one, get one free at Target, right? You shouldn't have to hunt online to find a chest binder. You shouldn't have to hunt online to find a packer or a stand-to-pee device or a breast form, right? And so I think that, what the last piece I'll just note as an individual, I make sure that I give money to organizations that align with my values. And I also look at the makeup of their board of directors, the makeup of their staff. I look at the makeup of people making decisions. And there's a phrase that really, in the modern terms have come out of the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us. And so if our goal is to continue to work for all LGBTQ folks, if there's not representation in that decision-making table, then we got to reevaluate that table. And we're seeing now, more so than we have in the past, LGBTQ folks of color saying, listen, I don't even want to go to your table. I'm going to go form Black Trans Men Incorporated. I'm going to go form Black Pride RVA because it's time for us to do something separate. Doesn't mean that you can't come to the party, doesn't mean you can't be a part of the group, but we're going to prioritize this over here, right? And I think that actually makes our movement stronger, not weaker, right? So I know we're tight on time, so I'll pause there and turn it back over to Ray or Logan or wherever we're going next.
Thank you all for those answers and for those pieces. It definitely, again, bringing it back to the history and also looking at where we need to go with this. Our final question for the night before we turn it over to questions from our viewers that have been posting within our Zoom as well as other streaming platforms that are viewing us. But the final question for the panelists is, and I'll let you all answer before I go, given that these privileges and resources exist within and were born out of heteropatriarchal, big word right there, capitalist society, can they truly be leveraged in the fight for racial LGBTQ equality? Or does this require dismantling, and we touched on this, the entire system that systemically reinforces the various oppressions that LGBTQ individuals and Black queer people of color face?
So I'll start and say the hard thing, right? Dismantle. Absolutely. You cannot fix the system isn't broken, right? Like that's the thing. The system is not broken. It is working in the way that it was fashioned to do so. So you have to dismantle that system, and in dismantling it, build a new system that works for everyone. I think there's a lot of things being lost in translation when we say like defund and dismantle the police, or let's dismantle the economic development department down at City Hall, right? Because clearly they ain't doing nothing. So it takes more than just let's see how we can make it work. It's already working. So let's dismantle it and let's build something new, right? This is, and I'm an idealist, right? So I totally see, I try to see the world through rose-colored glasses and think that everybody can, be their best selves always, right? And so I really think that in this country that, was one built off of the backs of Black people, of indigenous people, right? People who are historically marginalized, was also the country that rebelled against its white people rebelling against their own white oppressors, right? No one liked the Queen, and everybody was upset about the taxes, and they dumping tea in rivers, and they're mad, right? And they dismantled that system to build one that they thought would work for them. This is that country, right? Like, we did that already. So why is it so hard for people to wrap their brains around the idea that this clearly isn't working the way that it should for all people, but it is working in the way that it was intended? So let's dismantle it and build something that works for everyone.
So the question of resources is, can they be leveraged in the fight for racial and LGBTQ equality? So my short answer is, in the fight for equality, yes, these funds can be used as long as they're used for equity. But in the fight for liberation, absolutely not. Funds from the system can't be used to dismantle the system, because it doesn't work that way. Resources acquired within the system will forever connote the exploitation of humans. So there's never going to be a way to take these funds and dismantle and rebuild the system with them. I'll tell you, prior to the pandemic, I would have answered this question a whole lot differently. But since we've seen the rise of COVID and the disproportionate impacts to the minority veteran community, specifically Black and African American, Native American, and Alaska Native, so there's multiple communities within that we are continuing to see our rising unemployment rates, rising homelessness. Unemployment rates have risen from veteran homelessness. It was at 3% before the pandemic, is now at 11. So we're watching our communities start just barely trying to survive. We've seen over 700 applications to our one COVID relief fund that we just started in March. And so we're recognizing that our community is literally hemorrhaging the ability to be able to care for itself. I've never really enjoyed the conversation around corporate money, because there is always bringing corporate money into your organization or into any movement that you're building always means that there's somewhere that voice is incorporated into what you do. And so I think ultimately you can use the money to invest in equity, and I think that's the only way that you can. But at the end of the day, when we're actually talking about liberation, and that the liberation that all of our collective liberation is tied to, I don't think that these funds can actually be made to build a more just society. I think that the dismantle and rebuild is the only way that we actually get there.
I agree. It ain't working. It never worked. I mean, I saw something the other day that was mind-boggling to me. In 1955, in September, Emmett Till's murderers were let go. I think it was the 23rd of September. What happened on the 23rd of September with Breonna Taylor? So that right there tells you something ain't working. And it ain't working because it's never worked. And so I don't know what it takes to dismantle police. I know I come from a family of former cops, and police are not high on my list as a Black trans man, because they don't see a Black trans man, they see a Black man. Okay, and so something's not working, and we should not in 2020 be sitting here having this conversation. If it was working, we wouldn't be on Zoom talking about why stuff is not happening and working for people of color. We should be where we thought were Martin Luther King and all the other the Marsha P. Johnsons and the Miss Majors, who fought and got their asses kicked and killed for us. We shouldn't be here today having these kinds of conversations. So when I say yes, dismantle the son of a bitch and start all over again. Sorry, I get worked up and then my mouth gets really bad.
I love it, Charlie. I'm accustomed to it. I'm doing real good because I don't know how James feel about it. I'm keeping it together, but I loved it.
Awesome. If any other panelists want to jump in, I'll give you a moment to, but if we're ready to move on to questions, we can go ahead and do that as well.
The one tiny thing I just wanted to note is that we're in a unique moment right now with the pandemic that we haven't seen in modern times. So in terms of dismantling and reimagining, if there was ever a time when that was possible, it is now. The unemployment rate in the US is sitting between 8 and 9%. It has never been that high, ever, since we've been collecting that data. Now, here's the scary thing. According to the National Center for Transgender Equality, the unemployment rate before the pandemic for transgender people was 15%. That's before the pandemic. That's before COVID. That's before safer at home, and that's before you couldn't go anywhere. So we have an opportunity. Now, I think that the reality is we have an election coming up, and I would encourage people to research not only on a national level, but the local level. Who are candidates who support the policies and practices that you support, right? I can't tell you who to vote for, only you can do that. And legally speaking, I can't tell you who to vote for because it's against the rules as a nonprofit leader, right? But I also will say that voting is not enough. Once you vote someone into office, you have to hold them accountable, right? And if we're really talking about dismantling the system, we have to look at what's possible, right? So we have, conversations, for example, around, well, what if DC becomes a state? What if Puerto Rico becomes a state? These are majority minority parts of the US. That would dramatically change what the US Senate looks like. The Supreme Court has not always had only 9 justices. It has ebbed and flowed. There's nothing to say there can't be more or less. I think that one of the biggest fallacies to the American dream and this idea of America being amazing is that we thought that wealthy slaveholders who come from money could write a system of laws that would benefit everybody when literally nobody but them was at the table. And to now sit back and say, I don't know if George Washington would appreciate it. George Washington was too busy beating the Black person. I don't care what George Washington would have thought. George Washington is not a part of my conversation right now. I want to focus on what's today. And so I will just say, voting is important. And we have to do something on November 4th. So what I've started to ask people is, what's your plan on November 4th? Not what's your plan November 3rd on election day. What's your plan on November 4th? What are you going to do, right? What's going to happen? How are you going to use your time, your talent, and your treasure to further equity in your community? But the election can't be the end all be all, right? And that's all I was going to offer, Logan. Sorry for cutting you off there.
Oh, not at all. That's why I asked if there were any further comments, and I think that was a fabulous contribution.
Logan, I'll add one thing before you go on to this next question to piggyback Ted, because he lit me up when he was like, I don't care what George Washington was doing. And also the point of November 4th. I feel like after last year, everybody that really voted and we did whatever your decision was, there was this feeling of defeat the day after. And a lot of people got lackadaisical in the situation. And it's like, well, I'm just gonna wait these 4 years out. It's just, this is just what it is. And I'm so defeated. And then things started progressively getting worse. And because we got busy with our day-to-day life and we got disfocused. And then it wasn't until everybody was forced to stop this year and sit down and really see what has not only transpired over the past 3 or 4 years, but also what has already been. For liberty and justice for all, it was never meant for the vast majority of us on this call. So until we acknowledge that, tear it all down, knock it down. I'm a lover of Black Twitter, the little boy who kicks the table and shakes it all. Shake the table, knock it down, clear the table, Real Housewives of Atlanta style, all of that, knock it all over, because it was never meant for the vast majority of us to begin with. So, and even cis white men, unless you're a millionaire, unless you're paying a couple $100 in taxes, it won't meant for you either. So tear it down, start over, rebuild it, realize that we all are one. And until we do that, look, Tay, I knew the amount, but I didn't know how, I didn't want to get none of y'all in trouble. That's, I don't work for a nonprofit, so I can say whatever I want. I'm not representing my company, but it is what it is. We all are one. The vast majority of us are one. Unless you're a billionaire, unless you're that smooth 1 to 3% of America, this is it. This is it. Come together and choose a better future for yourself, for your kids. That's it. So knock it all over, tear it all down. All of that, I'm with it. So that is me. But Logan, you can definitely roll into to our listeners' questions. We've been texting back and forth, and I think we got some good ones that have come through.
Definitely. And thank you for cutting me off. I'm glad you did. That was an awesome addition. So we have a question from Edward Strickler, who asked, we discussed that historically some cultural factions established their priority or privilege in leadership, priority setting, funding of services, etc., such as white identified, cisgender, educated and affluent identified groups. And if that's something that we should aim to change, shouldn't metropolitan-centered leadership, priority setting, and other privileges change to give leadership to rural-centered issues, values, and priorities? The assumption that rural residing queer folks would list the same set of issues or prioritize the list the same as metro residing queer folks is potentially problematic. And this is something that he wants to kind of ask community leaders and queer community leaders and people who have been involved in racial equity movements as well.
So I would like to start out with this. I think that when we start to have the conversation about rural living, that is just, code for white, right? So let's take the resources away from the metro areas, the Black areas, and let's redirect them to rural areas, right? That actually happened this year with the Reinvestment Act, I believe of like 78, right? The Community Reinvestment Act of 78. So this was an investment act that came about after the Civil Rights Movement and after redlining, to try to help promote Black economic growth, right? So you had the implementation of CDFIs, which are financial institutions that are supposed to lend directly to metropolitan areas, AKA the Black folks, right? This year, those funds, without ever actually, no one ever kept the data, so nobody knows how much money was actually given through this program. And we all see the Black business districts and Black areas across the country look exactly the same, blighted. And now, in response to that, they now want to redirect those funds to rural areas, right? Rural means white. And so I personally do not support any type of idea that says that, well, we've given enough to the metro areas, we've done enough for those people, let's now start to refocus our energies on these white folks out in the rural areas who need it, right? And I'm not saying that they don't need it, but if you help someone in that metro area, when you help Black people, like Ted said, like I've said before, right? When you help the least amongst us, which are Black trans folks, everybody ahead of the line will benefit as well. And rural people are not at the end of the line, not in this instance and not ever. The concentration of wealth in Goochland County alone proves that rural they're not wanting, at least not from what I can see. It's the metropolitan areas, it's the Black folks that continue to go without, who continue to have funds redirected from their resources into these outer areas of the country that are really, in a space where they need help and have always needed help.
And I'll also add to that, Logan, being from a rural area, nobody is gonna probably believe this, but I'm from Farmville, Virginia. I graduated from Cumberland High School. I'm a country girl through and through. I ran as quick as I could. I got to Richmond. That was a big city. My family was so worried about me. My first apartment was a loft apartment on Broad Street above 27 restaurant. They just knew I was going to die. So it is a miracle I'm still sitting here in Short Pump now, because they did not trust the city. But I'm from a rural country area. I didn't feel like I was comfortable enough to come out and to be myself really and discover my sexuality, honestly, until I got a job at Capital One. And that's where I met my first girlfriend, who's my now girlfriend. That was in '06, so that's my journey. But also too, I know family members of mine, as far as the Black Lives Movement and Black people don't realize this. If you ever got a chance to go see the Determined exhibit at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, it gave you a big piece about Virginia history around integration. Prince Edward County school systems refused to integrate. It was just on the news today where I think it was Loudoun County apologized because of the fight that they had in refusing to integrate. So when we're talking about leveraging resources and what do rural communities really need in some way, shape, or form a reality check, because a lot of times within those communities, they were the ones that held us back. The Moat Museum is there because of what Black students did to demand a quality education. Prince Edward Academy was formed and is now Fuqua School because of the refusal to integrate. So a lot of times in rural communities, and I am a product of one, but I struggled. I went to Longwood University. At one point, Longwood University did not allow Black women. I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We were the first Black Greek sorority on that campus. My aunt was one of the first. So I know about those rural first, and it is, yes, they've slowly progressed for Black people, but it's an even slower movement when it comes to the LGBTQ community. And I could take you down a back road, sure enough, that I would never want to break down. Sundown towns are real. They still exist, and they're not that far away. You don't got to go to Mississippi. You don't got to go to Alabama. So there is resources that needs to be invested within these rural communities, but the community as a whole needs to be welcoming. And me as a Black queer woman needs to feel comfortable if I'm going to deliver those resources to those community members. Because otherwise I'm trying to figure out, how can I help those kids that are struggling? How can I help a young me that was trying to figure out who I was before I was able to get away and get a job in the big city and figure out me. So because it really is still a danger in a lot of rural communities, A, to be Black, and B, to be openly gay. Anybody else have a comment on that? I know we have another question that I was going to go into, but if anybody else has something, please.
I did just want to clarify. Rural areas do need resources, right? But those resources should not come from metro areas that need them as well, right? These are, I don't think the answer is to take away from this segment to give to this segment. I think we just need to give to both.
All right, so the next question that we had here from our listeners, this one says, I identify as a queer white cis female, and my child is a white cis female. 8 years old, and they identify as non-binary. And I find that a lot of the issues we have faced in the last year in terms of expressing gender identity and gender creativity in school create a crossover with the issues that transgender kids might face. When trans rights are attacked, I feel that my child's non-binary rights are also tied into that. Can the panel, excuse me, can the panel address the link between trans and non-binary and how that might carry into the future? So I know we definitely have some non-binary folks on the panel. So definitely, if you could lend your opinion, your thoughts to this, I'd appreciate it, as well as our listener.
So I'm non-binary, and I would offer that for me, and everybody's different in how they understand their own identity. So I'm only going to speak from my own experience, right? But for me, I identify under sort of the transgender umbrella as non-binary, right? My sex assigned at birth was male. I don't identify as a man. I identify outside of that binary. I use they, them pronouns. And that has been the case for the vast majority of my life, right? So I would say that they're absolutely connected. And in your question, I think you absolutely laid it out. I think that what sometimes we miss is actually the connection for transgender rights to connect to cisgender people, right? So transgender people being able to live their full authentic selves in the world actually helps disassemble the strict gender code we have for cisgender men and women. So studies have shown that having a gender and sexuality alliance, what we used to call gay straight alliances or GSAs, in a school actually reduces bullying for all students. The #1 group to benefit, not surprising, is LGBTQ kids. The #2 group to benefit in schools that have GSAs is heterosexual cisgender boys. Because when there's a strong GSA that is pushing against that idea of strict gender conformity, the names that you call boys to make fun of them disappear. You can't call me a fag anymore if that's no longer acceptable in the school. You can't say that I'm gay, or I'm a sissy, or I'm a dyke, or I'm too butch, if we allow for transgender people and non-binary people to bring their full authentic selves, right? My very existence, trans people's very existence, challenges that notion of that gender binary in a way that everyone will benefit from, right? And so one piece I did want to add, in terms of the unique moment we're in right now, the General Assembly in Virginia passed the law requiring the Virginia Department of Education to create policies for transgender students in K-12 schools. And that's going to come out in December of this year. And all public school districts will have to adopt inclusive policies by the 2020-2021 school year. Now, the statistic I always like to remind folks of is Brown versus Board of Education happens in 1954. Integrated schools in the city of Richmond happened in 1974. So as someone working for trans inclusion in school districts, I'm looking at the tools the civil rights movement did to ensure integration happened in public schools and equity of resources is not going to be repeated with 20 years waiting for transgender kids to be able to go to school as their full authentic selves, right? So I just wanted to note that other thing, there's a unique opportunity for parents, caregivers, and youth to really advocate on the local level for policies because they're technically required by law to do so in Virginia before the 2021 school year.
Thank you, Ted. Anybody else on the panel, whether trans or non-binary, have any feelings around this and want to share with our listeners? Awesome. Ted, I think you did it, especially you always. Let's see, moving on into the program. Logan, do you want to go next? Were there any more questions? I know we've been texting back and forth. Are we going to move ahead with closing out our program and asking our panelists for final thoughts?
Sorry, I'm muted. I think that's where we're at. So yeah, just initially to thank everyone so much for participating, especially our panelists for taking this time and, you know, giving of themselves and, you know, explaining some things to some of us that have obviously been very real realities for you for your entire existence. And, you know, we appreciate that you took the time to do that for us and just to create spaces and have conversations like these is very meaningful and your participation means a lot to us. So if anyone has closing remarks, now's the time.
I just want to thank everyone again for this very, very important discussion. This is obviously something that folks are really interested in. We've gone far over what we originally thought, and I think that that's a really good sign that we have folks that are engaged, that want to learn more, and that want to, you know, and that want to work together on this. these conversations can be uncomfortable and they can be difficult, and that's okay. I mean, I think that that's how we move forward, is we have to make each other a little uncomfortable from time to time, and we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. On behalf of Virginia Pride, again, thank you all for participating in this today. I'm going to drop my email in the chat just in case anyone wants to reach out to me directly, and so certainly feel free to do that. But again, thank you to all the other panelists. Thank you to Common House. Thank you to RVA Magazine for working with us with Virginia Pride on this. And we will continue to have these discussions. And I hope you'll participate again. Thank you.
So I just wanted to send a message to Ray. I just want to note one quick thing that happened in this in our conversation tonight, that as a white person, it's really easy for me to talk about being non-binary. That doesn't make me uncomfortable because it is an oppressed identity and I can talk all day, night long. Talking about being white is hard. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel guilty and shame sometimes, which doesn't help the movement and doesn't move us forward. Tonight, we were talking about what it means to, what's the intersection between Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQ rights movement. And we included some questions around what it means for rural communities. And we put that in a context of what race looks like. It's easy to deflect and jump to, gosh, we need to be talking about rural folks. That's not what tonight's conversation was. So for the white folks who are in our beautiful comments on the Zoom, I challenge you, talk about race. Stop talking about rural stuff. That's not what this conversation was about. I would love to be on a panel about the needs of rural LGBTQ people, and I will be there front and center and even pay the admission fee. But that was not what tonight was about. We have to stop deflecting the conversation about race to things we are comfortable about. I'm grateful that you brought up rural communities, and I'm even more grateful that Natasha was able to frame what that looks like in terms of divesting from Black communities to invest in rural communities. And yes, politicians use rural as code for white. That is not new. Just because it's code for white doesn't mean that there aren't Black people who live in rural communities or LGBTQ people who live in rural communities. And Natasha didn't say that. She said it's code for white, right? So I just want to challenge us, if we're gonna talk about race, let's talk about race. Don't talk about all this other stuff. Don't talk about rural, don't talk about just trans folks, talk about Black trans folks. Let's talk about Black rural folks, and push yourself to not run to that marginalized identity where it feels comfortable. Because I know I do it too, right? I did it in that last question. I didn't talk about race in that last question. So this is for me, a reminder for myself as well.
Thank you.
I'll just say I'm old school. Rural is not a word we used to use. It was in the country. So I'm back in the country. But I just want to thank everybody, and thank you for inviting me to do this. And I was really uncomfortable, but I was more comfortable because a person who has seen me from the very beginning was on this panel with us, and that was Ted. So Ted saw me on my first few days of journey trying to get into this world of being trans. And I want to thank Dan for being here. He's one of my members of CVO Pride, and my mentor is Jonathan Thunderword. That's a person you need to be able to pick his brain, because Mr. Jonathan has seen stuff in life that we would never, ever. He's one of my board members of Black Trans Men. But I just want to thank everybody for even, James, you might not trust me to be back on another panel because my mouth is so bad, but
you are welcome anytime.
I want to
second that, Charlie.
Thank you all.
Right.
Anybody else? Final remarks, Lindsay, anybody?
Well, I will say I really have appreciated this conversation. Thank you, James. Thank you, Charlie, Ray, Ted, Common House, Lindsay. Thank you all so much. Just for this opportunity. And I don't know if everybody saw the chat, but I am always open and happy to have a discussion, with anyone about anything. So if it's if you do want to discuss anything further, please feel free to schedule some time. I'd love to chat with you.
Well, I would just like to say real quick, I know everybody there, I think, is from Virginia, And why am I here? Because I was born and raised in Virginia. Virginia is my home. One day I'll return, so y'all straighten out all this before I get back.
We'll try.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Lindsay, are you still with us? Any final remarks?
She dropped off, so.
Okay. Well, I guess before I turn it over to Logan to close us out, I'll give mine. I'm just, again, honored to be able to co-moderate this. This isn't just something that's important to me. This is who I am as a Black queer woman. And I said this to Natasha and Kevin after the last time I spoke for them. I was like, you know, think over the past decade, through this community, I've kind of grown into myself. And I told Kevin, I said, thank you for taking a chance on a loud Black queer girl from the country. And it has truly been a long time coming, but I wouldn't change my story for a minute. Thank you, Ted, for standing up. And actually, in my private comments for my people watching this, somebody said Ted and Lindsay need to run for president. So somebody tell Lindsay that when you reach out. But definitely, like, thank you for your comments. Thank you for advocating for the community as a whole. I've known that about you, you know, since I've known you. Outside of just this year, you always believe that everybody needs the level of equality. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for my panelists, you know, for sharing your stories and for being a part of this. Natasha, you know I love you. Trickle up all day, economics. So definitely, this has been something that for me has been healing. I'm usually, like I said, on the other side of this. So it's been nice to really lend my voice and not just type and ask questions and having somebody pose my questions, but to really provide my answers. So thank you, James and Virginia Pride, for the opportunity. It's been a great evening. So Logan, I will let you close this out.
Thank you. And thank you so much to everyone. I think what I was trying to say before that Ted kind of helped me frame in my mind is that as white people, it's definitely our responsibility to confront our whiteness, and it's our responsibility to learn. And I'm really appreciative of, despite the fact that it's in no way more marginalized populations' responsibility to teach us anything, that people are willing to take the time and participate in these conversations. And to all our panelists, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fabulous. To our sponsors, Virginia Pride, RVA Magazine, Gay RVA, thank you all so much. CVO Pride as well. Charley, I really appreciate you joining in and representing that group. This has just been, it's been so great. This has been, like Ray said, healing. I didn't expect us to go an hour over, but I'm glad we did. I think, like James said, it speaks to how fruitful the conversation was. So yes, Charley, Ray, Natasha, James, Lindsay, and Ted, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fabulous. And I posted my email in the chat, so if anyone wants the recording, feel free to reach out. And the programming team at Common House is looking to do more and more events like this and get more and more involved. So if any of y'all are interested in partnering with us on something like this, feel free to reach out that way as well. Seriously, this has been beautiful. So thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you.